Tonight, the opposition tries to push the Arnold government to an early election.
But the independents stand firm.
And former Premier John Bannon has his say.
I have to take responsibility, and I have done so.
First in news. This is Eyewitness News with George Danikian and Nikki Dwyer.
Also tonight, dramatic new evidence in the Colin Winchester inquest.
And two Wells residents prepare for yet more floods.
Good evening. The state government is battling for its survival tonight in Parliament, fending off a series of allegations in the wake of the Royal Commissioner's State Bank report. And Chris Kenny joins us live now. And Chris, just what is the tactic the opposition is using?
George, the opposition has moved a motion of no confidence in the government. If it passes, and it would need the support of at least one of the independent MPs, the government would be forced to an early election. Now, we have seen some of these showdowns, a few of these showdowns since the State Bank collapsed, but this is by far the most serious. In the wake of the Royal Commission, the South Australian public may well have lost confidence in its government. The government can live for a time without that. What it needs is the confidence of the Parliament. The opposition immediately sought to test that today with a motion of no confidence.
If the government survives this motion, it will be yet another blow to the people's confidence in our political system.
The motion centres on 5 key claims drawn from the Royal Commission findings. They are that the government misled Parliament at least 16 times, encouraged rapid and dangerous growth by the bank, breached the State Bank Act, used the bank as a cash cow to boost government coffers, failed to heed warnings about the bank's problems for more than 2 years before the collapse, and manipulated State Bank interest rates 3 times to help win elections. Liberal leader Dean Brown accuses Premier Arnold of sitting on his hands throughout the disaster.
When is he going to be prepared to stand up and be answerable to the people of South Australia?
And he sought to condemn the whole of Labor's front bench.
Did we have a cabinet of 13 monkeys running our state who weren't prepared to ask the Premier and Treasurer a few fundamental basic questions about the performance of the State Bank and get some honest answers?
Premier Arnold downplayed the whole issue, saying the opposition was overly eager to take government.
Yet again, sir, was that eagerness, that sort of real keenness, the how many sleeps to Christmas keenness of the leader, wanting to get, trying to somehow get into government. The government embarked on the Royal Commission to find answers and to see blame directed where it should go. And that process is underway and still underway.
Of course, the whole show is for the benefit of Independent Speaker Norm Peterson, on whose casting vote the government survives or goes to the polls.
This is one of the most significant debates that's been held in this Parliament in my time, certainly in anybody else that I can see from where I'm standing at the moment. And I ask everybody to pay due attention, due respect, and listen, and all contributions to this debate be listened to with respect and silence.
Indeed, Mr Peterson will need to listen carefully to this debate. The pressure on him is already starting to show, as we'll see later in the bulletin. Now, there's been time set aside for this debate until midnight tonight. It will be a long debate, but at this stage it appears the independents will side with the government, George.
Yes, thanks for that, Chris. Chris Kenny, live at Parliament House.
The political debate over the State Bank controversy is centred on various interpretations of the Royal Commissioner's findings. Both the government and the opposition are using extracts from the report to support their stands. After following the issue for more than 4 years, state political reporter Chris Kenny offers his assessment.
Faced with a scathing indictment of his government by the Royal Commission, Premier Lynn Arnold has adopted a two-pronged defence. The first was that the findings on Term of Reference 1 provide only part of the picture. The Premier wants a stay of execution until all the State Bank reports have been made public. That defence is fundamentally flawed. Term of Reference 1 was always to be the crucial area for the government. From the moment the bank collapsed, it was obvious its management and board had operated ineffectively. But given the opposition had spent 2 years probing the State Bank in Parliament, suggesting major problems were developing, and given the government continually and vigorously rejected those claims, the issue that needed to be resolved was the extent of the government's culpability. That was the aim of Term of Reference 1. We now have the results, and the government has been condemned. That brings us to Premier Arnold's second line of defence, that Former Premier and Treasurer John Bannon's resignation has settled the score, but Commissioner Jacobs has quite deliberately spread the blame past Mr Bannon onto the whole Labor government. He uses the word government many times when he could have said Treasurer. It was the government which sought political advantage through the bank, the government which lost sight of the bank's charter, and the government, as well as the Treasurer, which was short-sighted in the face of early warnings. The findings also show that Parliament has been misled. It's perhaps asking too much for the government to resign. But the people of South Australia at the last election built safeguards into the Parliament. They elected 2 independent MPs, Norm Peterson and Martin Evans. Labor Party infighting has added Terry Groom to the independent ranks. The credibility of these 3 men is now on the line. Are they independent, or will they support a Labor government at any cost?
A comment piece from Chris Kenny. All 3 independents maintain now is not the time to desert the government. And the man who's under most pressure is Speaker Norm Peterson, and he still hasn't read the report.
No. Will you support the opposition? In a vote of
Hello
no,
there,
no.
Ian. Are you well? I'm not giving you any comment.
When Norm Peterson arrived at Parliament House this morning, he made it clear he didn't want to talk about the Liberals' no-confidence move. A little later, while making his weekly visit to Government House, Mr Peterson showed signs of the mounting pressure he's under.
Excuse
We've got a
me.
government
Well, you see, I
that's
must
bought
go
its
to
way
the
into
governor.
power.
Would you see
it's
that I
been
must see the governor? You're impeding me as the Speaker of the House carrying out my duties. Now, if you don't get out the way, you'll be in trouble. Would you mind stepping out of the way?
Mr Peterson, but is he prepared to step back into the political cauldron he opened up? And with Parliament only an hour away from its crucial debate, Mr Peterson made it clear he has his own agenda. Have you actually read the report yet?
No.
You haven't read it?
No.
For someone in your position of responsibility,
No.
don't you think you should have read it by now?
No, I'm letting all you experts tell me what's in it.
So you won't be changing your mind at all then on any of this?
If I'm anything I have information at the moment, no.
So maybe after you've read the report it might change?
I doubt that, but I think I have a fair idea what's in the report. Not the report that'll make the difference, is it?
The other independents seem to agree with Mr Peterson.
There's no basis for me to withdraw support from a Labor government. I am an independent Labor member of Parliament, and I think you should emphasise that. I'm an independent Labor member of State Parliament, and I think that is particularly important.
Martin Evans, who at least has scanned the Royal Commission report, says he couldn't support the Liberals' no-confidence bid as it stood.
Yes, on the basis of what I've read of the opposition's no-confidence motion, I intend to continue to support the government, yes.
The already considerable pressure on Mr Peterson may only intensify in the next few days as calls continue for him to use his casting vote to end Labor's reign. Leon Bignell, 10 Eyewitness News.
One of the key figures in the State Bank saga says there's no reason why Lynn Arnold should surrender government. Former bank director Rod Hartley was one of the first to warn the government not all was well. But he insists Mr Arnold did all he could to persuade John Bannon to act.
Rod Hartley was one of only 2 board members to survive the February 1991 bailout. In the Royal Commission report, he's credited with warning government in early 1988 of the dangers of bank boss Tim Marcus Clark and the weaknesses of the bank board. Commissioner Samuel Jacobs says John Bannon in particular should have paid more heed to Mr Hartley.
But even so, if those warnings had been taken note in late 1988, things might have been a bit better, yes.
Mr Hartley also passed his concerns to the man who would take Mr Bannon's place, Lynn Arnold, also years before the bailout. He says Mr Arnold did press those concerns with the Premier at the time.
So I don't think it can be said in any way that Lynn Arnold could have done more than he did. It wasn't his portfolio. I see no reason why Lynn Arnold should be held responsible for something that was very personal to John Bannon.
But business leaders say the bank disaster has ruined the state's economy. Prominent businessman and Deputy President of the Chamber of Commerce, Rob Gerard, says the moral thing to do is call an election.
And what we really got to do is get around and do something about it by probably letting the people say who they want to govern the state. We've had snap elections before from far less things than this.
But union leaders say the rank and file now want blood from those more directly responsible.
But sooner or later, some of the real villains, the speculators, those that bought property wasted, the state's money during the greedy boom of the 1980s, that these people should be brought to justice.
Opinion on the street is divided.
We're sorry for the people, we've got to pay it back, taxpayers, but it's just something that happens, It's part of life.
I think it's a disaster for the state and for us personally.
I think the fact that Bannon resigned probably gave them the right to stay on.
I'm disgusted with the government, actually. I think the government should be brought down.
And now we invite you to pass judgment on the Commissioner's findings. The question we're asking in our Eyewitness News phone poll is, in light of the Royal Commissioner's report, should South Australia have an early election? If you want to say no, dial 11626. If your answer is yes, dial 11628. Those numbers again, 11626 to say no to an early election, 11628 to say yes.
A dramatic breakthrough tonight in the investigation into the murder 4 years ago of Assistant Federal Police Commissioner Colin Winchester. A coronial inquiry has heard from a mystery witness who's provided a link between the key suspect and a rifle that police believe may have been the murder weapon.
The widow of Colin Winchester, supported by members of her family, walked into the coroner's court in Canberra, a tragic wrench back to the past and an inquest that officially ended over a year ago. Then there was an open finding on the murder. Now it's suddenly reconvened to hear new evidence from one earlier witness. This was the murder that shocked the nation. One of our most senior policemen gunned down at home. Coroner Ron Carl conducted a marathon 2-year inquest. The police's prime suspect was named as David Harold Eastman. He's never been charged. The mystery witness, 43-year-old Raymond John Webb, had given evidence 2 years earlier, but at that stage he made no mention of having bumped into another man when he went to buy a gun shortly before Mr. Winchester's murder. The guns were for sale at this house in Queanbeyan. They included a .22 Ruger rifle, the same type as the suspected murder weapon. All that was in evidence before, but this was new. As Webb was leaving, another man rudely pushed past him. That man, Webb now swears, was David Eastman. Has it ever crossed your mind that that man might be the murderer? Counsel for the police asked. It could be, but I didn't know. All I know, he is a violent person, Webb replied. Why did you not tell the whole truth? I didn't want to get involved. I was worried about my family. Webb's occupation and address were suppressed and he left the court under close police guard.
It's time for a look at sport, and Peter Marker joins us now. And Peter, tragedy overnight has claimed one of Australia's up-and-coming cyclists, one of the boys that actually went to Barcelona.
Yes, that's right, George. Tributes tonight for road cyclist Darren Smith, killed last night in Queensland doing what he loved best. Smith was regarded as one of Australia's most promising Olympic prospects and had been considering moving to Adelaide to train.
Just going out there, sort of give it my all, sort of see how it turned out. So.
Darren Smith's determination to give his all won him enormous respect throughout the Australian cycling community. Relatives and friends trying to come to terms with his loss have been buoyed by tributes and condolences from around the country.
It's so sudden. 1 minute he's on top of the world, the next he's not around anymore. But yeah, we're doing the best we can at the moment.
Smith was a star on the rise, 16th out of a field of 200 at the Barcelona Olympics, 9th this year and runner-up last year in the Commonwealth Bank Cycle Classic, and planning an assault on the Tour de France. Coach and mentor Bob Panter believes his best was still to come.
The whole country has suffered a terrible loss because Darren had the potential to be, the greatest cyclist Australia has ever produced. He was still very young. At only 20 years of age, he'd achieved so much as an endurance cyclist.
The semi-trailer reduced Smith's cycle to little more than twisted metal and killed him instantly. Only 18 months ago he'd escaped serious injury after being struck by a car, also on the Pacific Highway. Brother Adrian says Darren was fully aware of the risks involved in his sport.
Coming up later in sport, a worried Adelaide City begins its National Soccer Cup defence against an in-form rival West Adelaide. Australia's swimming coach Don Talbot unveils his blueprint for our next Olympic pool assault. And the hot favourite for the 36ers coaching job says he'll look for more new blood. Some interesting stories coming up. I'll be back later.
Thanks for that, Peter. Residents of flood-ravaged Two Wells are again sandbagging their homes as storm clouds threaten to repeat the devastation of recent months. Fears that the Gawler River would burst its banks after yesterday's deluge have the State Emergency Service on full alert.
The past 2 months have brought only heartache for the residents of Two Worlds. Twice the Gawler River has burst its banks. Many who escaped the first time weren't as lucky the second. The worst floods to hit the area this century left hundreds of thousands of dollars damage, and a resolve that this sort of devastation wouldn't be allowed to occur again. The legacy of those floods and of the recent heavy rains is self-evident in the amount of water lying around the area, and that has emergency services and local residents taking the latest flood threat very seriously. SES crews today kept a constant vigil on rising river levels as anxious homeowners looked on, hopeful this time wouldn't be so bad. Swelled by waters from the Lindock area, the Gawler River continued to rise, but by late afternoon it had reached its peak.
It was 5 metres at Gawler, and that was around about the first flood height. It's fortunate that hopefully at this stage it's not going to go over the top, but you have to take it seriously, because if you don't, when it does happen, you haven't got time to do anything.
But the waiting isn't over. The Weather Bureau has forecast more showers tonight, with rain and possible thunderstorms tomorrow. Philip Martin, 10 Eyewitness News.
Coming up, former Premier John Bannon has his say after the damning Royal Commission report. Princess Diana gives some advice on caring for children from broken homes.
Many of Adelaide's alcoholics were able to visit this place 24 hours a day, but not any longer. The full story later in the bulletin.
And Keith says we can expect more of yesterday's stormy weather.
I do hope you got some washing dry today, because conditions tomorrow will become subtropical once again and very unstable. In fact, showers should develop late tomorrow morning, with thunderstorms again tomorrow afternoon with a chance of more heavy falls. Rain will develop tomorrow night and persist into Friday morning. Now, Friday, a cooler day with showers in the afternoon. In fact, the weekend is shaping to be very cool. Saturday, further showers. Sunday should be mainly fine, but with temperatures under about 19 degrees. Tell you more about that tonight, round about 5 to 6.
5 people are dead after a head-on collision on the Hume Highway near Gundagai in New South Wales. The crash is the latest in a series of fatal accidents in the area during the past month.
The latest accident just outside the small town of Dugong on the Hume Highway stretched local emergency services to the limit. An early model Toyota Crown carrying 5 young men aged in their late teens and early 20s slammed head-on into this Ford Capri just after 8:30. Killed instantly the Toyota driver, the 57-year-old driver of the Capri, and his 77-year-old female passenger. When emergency crews arrived, the dead and injured lay strewn across a 50-metre stretch of highway. Both vehicles came from Victoria. Police say the Toyota heading north was travelling on the wrong side of the road. It's believed the driver may have mistaken the 2-lane highway for a dual carriageway.
He would have come off a dual highway about a kilometre and a half back. There's no skid marks, which either way that we could find.
It's the 3rd multiple fatality in the area in less than a month. The last, in which 3 people died when a car and a truck collided, was just 5 kilometres further down the highway.
What I've seen today, I've seen too often in the recent times. We've had 3 accidents in the last 4 weeks with 10 dead, 2 critically injured, and it's all in the one spot of road.
An emotional homecoming today for a group of Australians which was stranded in Bulgaria because of a financial crisis facing fledgling airline Jess Air. As Brian Schrouder reports, there were tears and anger for the 200 Australians as they touched down in Melbourne.
After their 12-day ordeal, the Australians finally made it home, flying a Balkan Airlines plane chartered by Jess Air. Most of the 240 passengers were Australian tourists, exhausted and weary after their holiday hell. There were tears of relief, but also anger for the hundreds of non-Australians still waiting for a flight.
Okay, fair enough, we're home, okay. But we're not happy, we're concerned about those people still stuck. We went through hell.
Their ordeal began when the Bulgarian airline Jess Air flew into financial strife. A plane destined for Australia was impounded as passengers were repeatedly promised a flight out of Bulgaria.
They kept us captive for 14 days telling us that, and nothing. They just tortured people by taking them to the airport and leaving them at the airport for hours on end, and there was no planes, and they knew there was no planes.
5 Australians missed today's flight, including one man who suffered a heart attack.
I'm so sad for my friends that I have left there. I feel I've abandoned them.
Just a mess, just a mess.
Others who lost their luggage vowed they'll never fly with the airline again.
Princess Diana has given some special advice on how to treat children of broken homes. The Princess, whose own marriage is under intense media scrutiny, says making children feel wanted could stop them turning to drugs.
The Princess of Wales was greeted by the Health Secretary, Virginia Bottomley. She's patron of the Institute for the Study of Drug Dependence and the Turning Point charity. But this was an intensely personal speech. The Princess, whose own parents split up, said that if children were given the affection they need, it could stop the spread of drug addiction amongst the young.
Hugging has no harmful side effects. If we all play our part in making our children feel valued, the result will be tremendous. There are potential huggers in every household.
After all the speculation about her own marriage, she appealed to the media to help her in the battle against drugs.
Like it or not, I've been quite a provider for the media. And now I'm asking for your help to reduce the suffering caused by drugs.
She told the media they could help directly by exposing the pushers, indirectly by shaping the views of young people. But she said for the vulnerable in society, there was no substitute for affection.
Next, alcoholics getting the short end of the stick because of funding cuts.
And an official warning on the danger of toy phones.
A warning tonight that toy telephones being sold in Adelaide could cause deafness among children. Capable of emitting more than 130 decibels, consumer officials have forced retailers to withdraw them from sale.
At close range, that high-pitched tone can deafen a child. At 130 decibels, it's well over the Australian toy standard for safe noise levels.
If they hold it 15 centimetres about here away from the ear, then the sound level is in the region of 100. So it's still over the limit that's laid down in the Australian standard.
Thousands of the imported toy phones have been sold in South Australia in the last 12 months. At the Department of Consumer Affairs' request, they've been withdrawn from sale. However, for those already in possession of the latest in kiddie communication, the advice is get a refund. Meanwhile, the Department of Consumer Affairs has released its annual report for 1991-92. More than 16,000 complaints were received, 2,000 more than the previous year. Most concerned real estate and accommodation, with more than 9,000 complaints. Used cars accounted for most motor vehicle disputes, and builders came in for their share of criticism. But from all those complaints, only 57 successful prosecutions. The department says the recession has produced an awareness among consumers, but stresses unless they're willing to speak out about a problem, they risk becoming victims to shoddy operators. Tanya Perry, 10 Eyewitness News.
It seems the state government is not only being criticised over the state bank. In Port Adelaide, the local council and people working with alcoholics are dumbfounded by the government's apparent lack of compassion. Paul Macon reports.
Oh, hi. You're looking a bit under the weather. Come on.
The Archway Sobering Up Centre, Detox, in Nile Street, Port Adelaide, provides invaluable help for alcoholics when they go on a bender. They used to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until financial cuts by the Drug and Alcohol Services Council gave them no choice but to reduce hours. For the area's alcoholics, this was a place to come for help. A friendly hand extended to ease the pain, 24 hours a day, but not any longer. It's 12 noon now, and this place doesn't open for another 3 hours.
It upsets my staff and it upsets me because we're not doing the job that we want to do. We've got clients who are suffering because of the cutback in hours due to the grant. And it's just, we're not able to do the job. Now, because of our cutback in hours, we've got clients leaving at 7 a.m. If it's raining, they leave at 7 a.m. And they've got nowhere to go. The only place they have got to go is an early opening hotel.
Now, I get dry when I talk, I start to lose the voice.
People like Faye Robertson and her friend Graham are typical of the people who need the detox unit open on a 24-hour basis.
You can open the stub if you want it. We are alcoholics, and that's why Paul's here.
Faye's 59 years of age. She started drinking at the age of 17.
I aged 2 buckets in the bedroom when I lived at Windsor Gardens.
2 buckets?
One to sit on and one to bed.
Graham is 45 years of age and is among a dying breed.
I know at least a dozen of my mates. We had one here a few weeks back. There's, I say, 12, 13 have died, and they haven't even reached 40. Haven't reached 40 years old.
Whereas if they were here during the day, the staff can talk to them, calm them down, quieten them down, and encourage them to do something about their life, encourage them to go onto a program.
Fine to the alcoholic doesn't mean anything. 2 p.m. is no different to 2 a.m. in the morning. They just don't think in terms of time. Any time is drinking time. The only effective way to operate is on a 24-hour basis.
We can die out here because you've got nobody to look after you. See, I take fits, I've got angina, I could have a heart attack, take a fit and die. Whereas those people are monitoring you 24 hours a day.
Not any longer. Bill Meal says the alcohol industry must take responsibility in the area of care and rehabilitation.
The Grand Prix is sponsored. We would like a sponsor similar to the one that sponsored the Grand Prix. This particular building was developed as a casualty for Port Adelaide, and now is a casualty for the industry.
We'll take a break, and right after we'll review the day's top story, that is the opposition's push for an early election.
And the man most severely criticised by the Royal Commissioner has his say.
Now updating the day's top story, the political fallout from the first State Bank Royal Commission report.
The Arnold government is fighting for its survival in Parliament, with the opposition moving a no-confidence motion.
Liberal leader Dean Brown claims the government misled Parliament 16 times, actively encouraged bank growth, breached the State Bank Act, used the bank as a cash cow, ignored repeated warnings and used the bank for electoral advantage. Our political reporter Chris Kenny is at Parliament House at this moment, monitoring the latest developments. Chris, just what has happened?
George, the debate is continuing. It's quite relaxed at the moment. Many members are out of the chamber. Some of them will be in their offices now watching this program, and others with their staffers, to assess reaction to today's events. There is a sense of anticipation with 2 key speakers yet to come. They'll both be given unlimited time. One is former Premier John Bannon, who of course has taken much of the blame for the State Bank fiasco. The other is former opposition leader John Olsen. Mr Olsen will be claiming that the State Bank secret subsidy during the last election campaign, the $2 million secret subsidy, cost the Liberals government during that election and cost him the premiership. So there's much to come. We won't have a result until much later tonight, George.
Thanks for that. Chris Kenny live at Parliament House. And as we've highlighted already, the Arnold government is hoping to survive on the basis that former Premier John Bannon's resignation was a high enough price for the State Bank's $3 billion losses. Well, today political reporter Chris Kenny spoke with a man who has received so much of the Commissioner's criticism.
Mr Bannon, you've had a long and until 2 years ago fabulously successful career. Are you dismayed that it's been brought to an end in this sort of fashion?
Obviously, yes. It's personally very upsetting and something that you know, is hard to come to terms with. Nonetheless, there were a lot of other good things that were done, and I believe my basic integrity is still untouched.
Apart from the findings themselves, it's Mr Jacobs' language that offends you even.
I think, to use a lot of the expressions he has, most unfair. I mean, one example which has been headlined everywhere, because it's a great phrase, I was dazzled by Mr Clark. I was not dazzled by Mr Clark. I do feel, you know, very hurt by those sort of terms.
You mentioned integrity. How can you continue to sit in Parliament, even as a backbencher, after this report has been so damning, not only of your performance, but I believe also in your integrity?
Well, firstly, I don't believe it touches my basic integrity, but secondly, I do agree that it has affected my discharge of my responsibility. And under our system, I have accepted that by resigning as Premier and Treasurer. I'm sitting on the back benches, and that is the penalty that's demanded.
You've been known as Honest John for a long while, but effectively this report says that you cheated in the political game. You used the bank for political advantage.
Well, I dispute that very strongly indeed. There is no question that I did actively intervene in relation to housing interest rates.
For electoral advantage?
That was public known. Not for electoral advantage, for the advantage of the community of South Australia. And to the extent that I was able to assist or satisfy the community's demand for government action, yes, certainly that would work to electoral advantage. But that's so of anything one does.
Well, Mr Jacobs has seen and heard all the evidence. He says political advantage.
Well, the political advantage flowed from what was the appropriate action.
Why should you take the blame, though, on your own? You weren't a dictator. The government supported you in your actions.
Because I was the Treasurer and Premier with the direct responsibility.
What was the rest of Cabinet doing through this whole process?
The rest of Cabinet had some very limited responsibilities in relation to the bank, and certainly on those core matters that the Commissioner talks about, I have to take responsibility, and I have done so.
The federal government is under fire in the fallout from the findings. Treasurer John Dawkins has been forced to defend the Reserve Bank, and the opposition claims the former federal treasurer, Paul Keating, should have been aware of the bank's imminent collapse.
The South Australian opposition moved a motion of no confidence to bring down the Arnold government. But with the pledged support of the independent Speaker, Norm Peterson, who holds the casting vote, the government is expected to survive. The Royal Commission blames the arm's-length approach of the former Premier, John Bannon, but he resigned in September in a bid to minimise the damage to the state government.
I have taken responsibility. That's the end of the story as far as the government's concerned.
The findings were also critical of the Reserve Bank's failure to exercise an effective watchdog role. But Treasurer John Dawkins says any arrangement with state banks is completely voluntary.
I would like to see the Reserve Bank having a larger role, but it depends on the arrangements which exist. Most of the state banks have now voluntarily subjected themselves to the normal supervision of the Reserve Bank.
But the federal opposition has gone on the attack, blaming the state government, the former federal treasurer Paul Keating and the Reserve Bank.
Mr Keating has got a lot of explaining to do, and it's about time he, as the person principally responsible for prudential supervision, gave us a full account of what he knew and when he knew it and why he failed to act.
And Eyewitness News is conducting a telephone poll on the Royal Commissioner's findings. We're asking if, in the light of the report, South Australia should have an early election. If your answer is no, dial 11626. If you want to vote yes, dial 11628. At the moment, calls are running 4-1 in favour of an early poll.
Yes, that's interesting. Anger and dismay at a mathematics exam paper tackled by thousands of Year 12 students across the state today. Teachers claim the Maths 1S exam contained questions which weren't part of the year's syllabus.
Most of the 5,000 students around South Australia sitting for the Maths 1S exam this morning were shocked to find question 12 in the 3-hour paper. It required them to solve a problem using 2 vertical lines on a graph. Most had only been taught how to use 1 line. That equated to half of the question, worth 18 marks, and the Senior Secondary Assessment Board of South Australia has met with its chief examiner and decided to take steps to rectify the anomaly.
What we are certainly proposing to do is mark the paper in the first instance, with the whole of the question included, and give the students a percentage score for the paper. And then secondly, we'll mark the paper again and take out of the paper the 3 parts of this question which are at issue here, and give the students a second percentage. We'll then take the best percentage that the students earned in those 2 markings.
The Assessment Board says it's received complaints from 25 teachers. Teachers from Nord, Unley, Adelaide and Pembroke schools claim the question caused considerable distress to students and shattered their confidence. John Parrington, 10 Eyewitness News.
Adelaide detectives have uncovered a $100,000 credit card scam. The offenders are using discarded carbon copies of credit card transactions to make illegal purchases over the phone.
Most people with credit cards know how easy it is to buy goods or services over the phone. According to police, it's too easy. Using a procedure that's believed to have originated in Victoria, offenders are retrieving carelessly discarded carbon copies containing credit card particulars and making illegal purchases. Or they're picking up card details via tapped phone calls. Police advise people not to make credit card transactions over the phone. But if this is too inconvenient or unavoidable, then it's imperative they check credit card accounts to ensure all purchases are legitimate. A man was arrested 2 weeks ago after customers noticed items on their credit card accounts they didn't buy. Police believe the man is one of several operating separately.
But we're looking at least 5 to 10 people and possibly quite a few more.
Particularly vulnerable are people using credit cards in brothels and escort agencies.
People using credit cards at brothels and escort agencies find it very hard to report the matter to police because of the family implications. They put themselves in a perfect position to be blackmailed.
Detectives will meet traders tomorrow to stress the importance of shredding credit card waste paper. Carolyn Jones, 10 Eyewitness News.
Next in sport, we preview tonight's big soccer cup derby. And the man likely to take over the 36ers says he'll be looking for more players.
Good evening to you. Well, after the gloomy start, didn't turn out to be a bad sort of day. Nice and sunny in the city at the moment, and will be a lovely night for the soccer, starting, I'm told, by George at 8 o'clock tonight. Now, weather-wise in the city, we had a top of 22.5 degrees today. That came at 25 past 4 this afternoon. The overnight minimum temperature 16.8, coming at 25 past 7 this morning. Now, interstate today, looking at the charts, it's been fairly wet down the eastern seaboard as that band of cloud went through over the past 12 hours. In fact, they had 17 millimetres of rain last night in Brisbane. Further showers there today with a top of 26. Sydney's had a miserable day, low cloud and drizzle all day with a top of only 18 degrees. Similar conditions in Canberra today. Melbourne had showers, top of 23. Hobart had a few showers, top of 21. Alice Springs had a very interesting day. First of all, it was very hot with blowing dust and thunderstorms in the area. Up until about 10 to 4 this afternoon, with an enormous thunderstorm went through the town. Dropped a lot of hail and also dropped temperatures 10 degrees in 10 minutes. So they're shivering up there at the moment. A lot of white around the place. Alice Springs had the thunderstorms. Darwin was mainly fine, and Perth today, quite a cold day in that southerly with a top of only 18 degrees. Now, here at home, we are in for some more subtropical weather. This low is moving down towards Port Lincoln. We'll be there about 9 in the morning, ahead of which the winds are going to strengthen from the north and seas are going to rise. That is going to drag a lot more tropical moisture in, and so humidity levels will go up. And so tomorrow we look forward to, once again, thunderstorms, fairly severe at times with local heavy falls. So at this stage, the scenario is with showers developing tomorrow, thunderstorms developing during the day, probably by late morning, possibly with some heavy falls in the afternoon. And as this front pushes in, rain will develop about this time tomorrow night. So during the day tomorrow, conditions deteriorating with the winds picking up. The rain should persist right through tomorrow night with some local heavy falls, possible local flooding. With the thunderstorms, there is the possibility also of some hail. Now, on Friday, the rain will persist initially, but that will ease to a few showers. Quite breezy at first on Friday, quite a chilly day, nothing over 20 degrees. Then for the weekend, still cool on Saturday, nothing over about, say, 18 degrees, still with some showers in the area, but by Sunday it should be mainly fine and mild. If you're going interstate tomorrow, very volatile down the eastern seaboard. Thunderstorms, Brisbane, Newcastle, Sydney, Canberra. Rain in Melbourne, Launceston and Hobart. Thunderstorms in the centre and the top, and rain tomorrow in Perth. At home today, 16 at Cape Border, went to 37 at Maree. The overnight lows out to 9 this morning at Roxby Downs. The heaviest fall of rain today was 4 millimetres up at Andamuka. If we look at the state satellite picture, you can see there's some thunderstorm activity in that area. That will start moving southward, so showers will develop here tomorrow with more thunderstorms and rain pushing in from the west. Indeed, there's the forecast for you. Scattered showers and thunderstorms extending to most districts with areas of heavy rain, isolated thundersqualls and hail on the way. Sticky day tomorrow, northerly winds. Temperatures will be up Mount Gambier 26, Victor Harbour 27 degrees. As for your waters, forget the fishing, only the one tide at 10. And as for the city, unsettled tomorrow with periods of rain, George. A low tonight of 15, top tomorrow 26 degrees.
Better not rain at the soccer. Thanks very much, and good luck with the kick-off. Tomorrow night in the Eyewitness News at 5. The inspirational story of how one young Australian sportsman lowered his handicap.
I had my leg amputated when I was 13. Started golf when I was 14, so about a year later.
Now he's setting his sights on joining the competitive ranks of the Pro Circuit Tour. That special report tomorrow night, first at 5. and some of you, I believe, are experiencing difficulties getting through to our phone poll. I ask you to be patient. You'll get through eventually. That's the way it is. This 18th day of November. I'll be back with updates a little later on.
We leave you now with pictures of a rare baby black rhino born yesterday at the San Diego Zoo.
Good night.
Good night.